The cargo ship was falling apart, and Cole was having the worst day of his life. Warning lights flashed red across every screen. The navigation system screamed about unknown coordinates. The engine made sounds that engines should never make, and somewhere in the chaos, realized that his simple delivery run had gone very, very wrong. He had been hauling medical supplies to a mining colony, a routine job, easy money. But then his jump drive malfunctioned, and suddenly he was in a part of space that no human had ever seen before. The planet below him was beautiful in a terrifying way. Purple oceans, silver forests, cities that glowed like captured stars, but had no time to admire the view because his ship was about to become a very expensive fireball. He aimed for what looked like an open area and prayed to whatever gods might be listening. The crash was spectacular. Punched through the ceiling of a building and landed in a shower of alien metal and sparking wires. His ship carved a trench through what he would later learn was the most sacred room in 17 star systems, the throne room of the Empire. For a moment, everything was silent except for the groaning of his dying ship. Then kicked open his cockpit and stumbled out into a nightmare. The room was massive. Golden pillars rose toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the sky. Thousands of alien beings stood frozen in shock, dressed in clothes that sparkled with jewels and strange lights. And on a throne made of something that looked like crystallized lightning sat the most terrifying creature had ever seen. She was 8 feet tall. Her skin was covered in scales that shifted through colors like a living rainbow. Her eyes burned with ancient gold, and when she looked at, he felt like an insect under a microscope. This was Queen the Undying. She had ruled her empire for 300 years. She had conquered 17 star systems. Entire civilizations had surrendered rather than face her armies. She had never, not once in 3 centuries, shown mercy to anyone who invaded her throne room. Stood there, covered in sealing debris and hydraulic fluid. His left arm was definitely broken. His ship was on fire behind him, and 12 armed guards were pointing weapons at him that could probably vaporize his entire family tree. He was going to die, that much was certain. But Cole had grown up on the rough edges of Earth's colony worlds. He had survived bar fights, pirate attacks, and one very memorable incident with an angry ex-girlfriend and a plasma torch. He had learned long ago that if death was coming, there was no point in meeting it with fear. So he looked up at the most powerful being in the known galaxy, and he smiled. "I know I'm supposed to bring flowers on the first date," he said, "but I figured crashing through your roof was more memorable." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Ambassadors from 12 different species pressed themselves against the walls. The Queen's advisors looked like they might faint from horror. But Queen did something that no one in that room had ever seen before. She laughed. It was a strange sound, like bells mixed with thunder. Her scales rippled with colors that had no names in any human language, and when she finished, she looked at with something that might have been curiosity. "You stand in my throne room," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You have destroyed property worth more than your entire planet. My guards could kill you with a thought, and you make jokes." Shrugged with his good arm. "Where I come from, we have a saying, if you're going to die anyway, you might as well die laughing. Your species is insane. We prefer to call it optimistic." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she raised one clawed hand, and the guards lowered their weapons. "You will not be executed," she announced. "Not today. This creature has amused me, and I wish to understand how such a thing is possible." The court erupted in whispers. This was not how they did things. Intruders were killed, enemies were destroyed, mercy was weakness. But no one dared question their queen. Was taken to a medical facility where alien doctors fixed his arm with technology that seemed like magic. They scanned his body and made confused noises about his strange biology. They asked him questions about Earth, about humans, about why his species seemed to find humor in everything. He answered as best he could, still not quite believing he was alive. Over the next few days, learned more about where he had landed. The Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They had been watching humanity for decades, studying this strange new species that had stumbled into the stars. Most alien races thought humans were interesting but unimportant, too young, too weak, too emotional. But they saw something else. They saw a species that laughed at funerals, that sang songs while marching into battle, that made jokes in the face of certain death. Humans didn't make sense to any logical analysis. They were walking contradictions who somehow thrived despite breaking every rule of survival. The galaxy thought humans were insane. Queen was beginning to think they might be exactly what her empire needed. Didn't know any of this yet. He only knew that he was trapped on an alien world, waiting for someone to contact Earth and arrange his return home. The Queen had made him her guest, which was apparently a polite way of saying, "Prisoner, we haven't decided what to do with yet." But something strange was happening. Every few days the Queen would summon him to her private chambers, not for interrogation, not for threats, just to talk. She asked him about human history, human art, human relationships. She seemed fascinated by the way his species formed emotional bonds, knowing they would end in loss. "Why do you do it?" she asked one evening, as they sat in a garden filled with flowers that glowed in the dark. "Why form attachments when you know they will cause pain?" Thought about his mother who had died when he was young, his friends scattered across the colonies, the relationships that had ended in heartbreak. "Because the pain means it mattered," he said. "Better to feel something and lose it than to feel nothing at all." The Queen went very still. And somewhere in the palace, hidden in the shadows, enemies of the throne watched the human with growing concern. This strange creature was changing their queen, making her soft, making her weak. They would have to do something about that. 3 months passed on the alien world, and Cole was still alive. This surprised everyone, including himself. He had expected to be executed, or at least sent home in chains. Instead, he had become something strange and unprecedented. A human who walked freely through the halls of the palace. A guest who dined with queens and spoke to nobles as equals. The court did not know what to make of him. He was too small to be threatening, too cheerful to be a spy, too strange to fit into any category they understood. He made friends with the servants by learning their names. He played games with the guards by teaching them human card tricks. He somehow convinced the royal chef to try making something called a sandwich, which became unexpectedly popular. But the nobles watched him with cold eyes. In 300 years, no outsider had ever gotten this close to the throne, and the Queen's behavior was becoming concerning. She smiled now, not the cold, political smile she showed to ambassadors, but real smiles that reached her golden eyes. She laughed at the human's terrible jokes. She spent hours talking to him about trivial things, things that had no political value, things that a queen should never waste time on. Something was very wrong. Saw none of this political tension. He was too busy trying to understand the impossible creature who had spared his life. Queen was a mystery wrapped in scales and ancient power. She could be terrifying one moment and almost gentle the next. She ruled an empire that feared her, yet she seemed desperately lonely. One night he found her alone on an observation deck, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked, walking up beside her. "I do not sleep as your kind does," she said. "My body requires only a few hours of rest each cycle. The remaining time I spend thinking." "That sounds lonely." She turned to look at him, and for a moment her mask slipped. Behind the power and the scales and the weight of centuries, saw something he recognized. the same loneliness he had seen in old veterans, in people who had lost everyone they loved, in himself sometimes on long cargo runs between the stars. "It is," she admitted, "more than you can imagine." That night, she told him the truth about her empire. They were empaths. They could feel the emotions of those around them, absorbing them like food. Fear, love, joy, anger, all of it nourished them, but for 3 centuries had been surrounded by only one emotion: terror. Her enemies feared her. Her allies feared her. Her own people feared her. Even her closest advisors carried a kernel of dread in their hearts when they stood before her. She had made herself so powerful, so invincible, that no one could feel anything else in her presence. And that fear was killing her. "There is a condition among my people," she explained, her voice hollow. "We call it the hollow throne. When a ruler absorbs nothing but fear for too long, it poisons the soul. I have perhaps 50 years left, perhaps less." Stared at her. "You're dying, but you're the most powerful being in 17 star systems. Power means nothing when you are alone." She looked back at the stars. "I conquered worlds because I was taught that strength was everything. I made myself into a monster because monsters are never vulnerable. But I forgot that monsters are also never loved." "That's," struggled for words, "that's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Your sympathy is noted but unhelpful." "I'm not offering sympathy," he said. "I'm offering perspective. On Earth, we have these things called therapists, people you pay to help you with emotional problems. And the first thing they tell you is that it's never too late to change." The Queen made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Change. I am 300 years old. I have been who I am longer than your entire species has existed. Change is not possible." "That's funny," said. 3 months ago, you were about to execute me. Now we're having conversations about feelings under alien stars. Seems like change is already happening." She looked at him with those ancient eyes and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. This was a being who had watched stars die, who had crushed rebellions with a thought, who had forgotten what hope felt like. But something in her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. "You are a strange creature, Cole. I've been told that before, usually by people who were about to punch me. Your humor is a defense mechanism. My humor is a survival mechanism. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, their conversations continued. Told her about Earth, about human history, about all the terrible and wonderful things his species had done. He explained democracy and art and music, and the strange human need to explore places that might kill them. In return, she taught him about their art, which was created through shared emotions, their music, which could only be heard by empaths, their long history of conquest and the emptiness it had left behind. They were becoming friends, real friends, not the political alliances that passed for friendship in royal courts, and that friendship was changing both of them. Found himself caring about this alien queen in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't a monster. She was a person who had been told her whole life that she had to be a monster to survive. Underneath the scales and the power, she was just someone who wanted to be understood. And for the first time in centuries felt something other than fear from another being. When looked at her, she felt warmth, curiosity, affection, emotions she had almost forgotten existed. The hollow throne was still killing her, but for the first time in 100 years, the process had slowed. Then the message came from Earth. A human diplomatic ship was on its way. They would arrive in 2 weeks to negotiate for return. They would decide whether to release their unexpected prisoner or use him as leverage for greater demands. Should have been happy he was going home. Instead, he felt something cold settle in his chest, something that felt uncomfortably like grief. He didn't want to leave. And in the shadows of the palace, 3 of the Queen's cousins met in secret. They had watched the humans' influence spread. They had seen their queen soften, weaken, become something other than the cold ruler they needed. This could not continue. The human had to die, and if the queen tried to stop them, well, perhaps it was time for a new ruler anyway. The assassins were hired, the weapons were prepared, and on the night before the human delegation arrived, the palace would run red with blood. The assassins came at midnight. Was in his quarters, unable to sleep, when he heard the screams. The palace alarm system exploded into noise, lights flashing red through every corridor. He grabbed the only weapon he could find, a heavy metal lamp, and ran toward the sound of fighting. What he found was chaos. The queen's personal guards were fighting shadow-wrapped killers who moved like smoke. Energy weapons flashed in the darkness. Bodies lay twisted on the ground, both attackers and defenders. And in the center of it all stood, her scales blazing with colors of rage, fighting 3 assassins at once. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. She was also bleeding from a wound in her side. Didn't think, he just moved. He grabbed a fire suppression device from the wall, the kind used to put out electrical fires. It wasn't a weapon. It was barely even heavy, but he aimed it at the nearest assassin and sprayed white foam directly into their face. The assassin stumbled, blinded, took the opening and ended them with a single strike. The remaining 2 attackers turned toward. He was small. He was human. He was holding what amounted to an oversized spray can. He should have been no threat at all. But Cole had grown up fighting people bigger and meaner than himself. He knew how to use surprise, how to use environment, how to turn weakness into strength. He threw the fire suppression device at one assassin's head and dove for a fallen guard's weapon. His fingers closed around the grip just as the 3rd assassin lunged for him. Caught the attacker mid-leap, her claws tearing through shadow wrappings like paper. Then it was over. The throne room fell silent except for the sounds of heavy breathing and distant alarms. 6 assassins lay dead. 4 royal guards had fallen, and Cole stood among the bodies, a weapon he didn't know how to use clutched in shaking hands. "You saved my life," said her voice strange. "You were handling it fine. The one you blinded was about to strike my back. I did not see them." She stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his face. "You threw yourself into danger for me, a human, unarmed, against trained killers. Why?" Tried to think of a joke, something light, something to break the tension, but nothing came. The adrenaline was fatting, and he was starting to realize how close they had both come to dying. "Because you're my friend," he said simply, "and friends don't let friends fight assassins alone." Something changed in her expression. Something ancient and guarded cracked open just slightly. Before either of them could say more, soldiers poured into the room. The investigation began, and by morning the truth was revealed. 3 of the Queen's own cousins had hired the assassins. They had supporters among the noble houses. Nearly a third of the empire's leadership was involved in the conspiracy, and their reasoning was simple. The Queen had been corrupted by human influence. She had grown soft. She had forgotten what it meant to be. Civil war was coming. The human diplomatic vessel arrived the next day, landing under heavy guard. Ambassador was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for impossible negotiations. She took one look at the situation and immediately understood that she had walked into something far bigger than a simple rescue mission. "Commander Cole," she said during their private meeting, "I need you to explain exactly what is happening here." Told her everything: the crash, the Queen's interest in humanity, their growing friendship, the assassination attempt, the conspiracy. Ambassador listened without expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You've made friends with the most powerful being in 17 star systems," she said finally. "And now her empire is tearing itself apart because of it." That's one way to put it. And your relationship with the Queen is purely diplomatic. Thought about all those conversations under alien stars, The Way's eyes lit up when he made her laugh, the feeling in his chest when she was wounded, the truth that he had been avoiding for weeks. "It's complicated," he said. The formal negotiations began, but everyone could feel the tension. The rebel faction had sent representatives who looked at like he was a disease. The Queen's supporters watched nervously, unsure of what would happen, and herself sat on her throne, her expression unreadable. The final reception was supposed to be a celebration of new relations between species. Instead, it became a battlefield of words and veiled threats. One rebel lord, a massive named N, had consumed too much fermented starlight. His hatred for the human had been building for months, and now it exploded into the open. "Look at him," and sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This tiny, pathetic creature, this insect. He has corrupted our queen with his emotional weakness. He has tainted the throne with his very presence." The room went silent. Ambassador signaled frantically for to stay calm. Every human in the delegation held their breath. This was exactly the kind of incident that could start a war. But was tired of being careful, tired of pretending that he didn't feel what he felt, tired of watching sit alone on her throne, bound by rules that demanded she show no reaction. He stepped forward and smiled. "You know what, Lord N? You're absolutely right. I have completely tainted your queen. She smiles now. She laughs. She's starting to remember what it feels like to be happy. Clearly this is a disaster of epic proportions." And Scales flushed with rage. "You mock us." "I'm not mocking anyone. I'm just pointing out that if caring about each other is a disease, then maybe being healthy isn't all it's cracked up to be." He turned to face directly, his heart pounding. "In fact, I've corrupted the queen so thoroughly that I think I should do the honorable thing." He dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," he said, "will you marry me?" The court erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Ambassador looked like she might have a heart attack. Guards moved forward uncertainly, not sure if this was a threat or a joke or something else entirely. But rose from her throne. Every voice fell silent as she walked down the steps, her scales shifting through colors that no one had ever seen before. She moved past the guards, past the horrified diplomats, past her scheming relatives, until she stood directly in front of the kneeling human. "You meant that as a joke," she said quietly. "I meant it as defiance," he replied, "but I'm starting to think I might have meant it as something else too." She looked at him for a long moment. 300 years of loneliness, 300 years of fear, 300 years of waiting for something she had forgotten how to name. "I was hoping you'd say that," she whispered. Then louder to the entire court, "I accept." The galaxy would never be the same. The announcement broke the galaxy. Every news network in known space ran the story. A human, a member of a species that had barely learned to travel between stars, was engaged to Queen the Undying. The most powerful monarch in 17 systems had chosen a mate from a race that most considered barely civilized. Some called it a miracle, others called it an abomination, everyone called it impossible. But for Cole and the bigger problem was staying alive long enough to actually get married. The rebel faction moved fast. Within hours of the announcement, Lord and declared the Queen unfit to rule. 3 star systems pledged their support to the rebellion. Governors who had served the throne for decades suddenly remembered old grievances and older ambitions. The Civil War had begun. Watched the military reports with growing horror. Systems falling, fleets defecting, populations caught between 2 armies that cared nothing for their safety. This was his fault. His proposal, his defiance, had lit the match that set the empire on fire. "You should leave," told him on the 3rd night of the war. "Your ship can still escape. Go home to your people. This is not your fight." "You keep saying that," replied, "and I keep not leaving. When are you going to accept that I'm stubborn?" "When your stubbornness gets you killed, I will be very disappointed. Then I'll try to stay alive just to avoid disappointing you." She almost smiled at that, almost. The war went badly at first. The rebels had planned their uprising for years, while the loyalists were scrambling to respond. Key military commanders had been bought or blackmailed. Supply lines were cut, and every day brought news of another defeat, another system lost, another 1,000 soldiers who would never go home. Felt useless. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a politician. He was a cargo pilot who had accidentally stumbled into the most important conflict in galactic history. What could he possibly contribute? The answer came during a War Council meeting. The Loyalist commanders were arguing about strategy, where to concentrate forces, which systems to abandon, how to minimize losses while waiting for the tide to turn. It was all very logical, very military, very. And it was failing. "What if we asked for help?" said. The room went silent. 12 commanders turned to stare at the human who had just interrupted their strategy session. "Help," repeated Admiral Oss, her voice flat with disbelief. "From whom?" "From everyone," stood up, knowing he was probably making a fool of himself. "Look, they have spent 300 years being feared. You've conquered systems, crushed rebellions, made everyone in the galaxy terrified of you. And what has it gotten you? An empire that's tearing itself apart because people think fear is the only thing that matters. You suggest we show weakness to our enemies. I suggest you show strength to potential friends." He pulled up a star map. "Humanity doesn't have big fleets or advanced weapons, but we've got something else. Connections. We've been making friends since we reached the stars. The thinking minds owe us favors. The Freeborn Confederacy has been trading with our colonies for decades. Even the Monastery of Silent Stars considers us intellectual partners." "These are small powers," Admiral Oss said dismissively. "What could they possibly offer?" "Maybe nothing military, but wars aren't won only with weapons. They're won with supplies, with information, with support from people who believe in your cause." Looked at. "Your Majesty, you told me once that you forgot what it meant to be loved. Maybe it's time to remember. Maybe it's time to give the galaxy a reason to love you." It was a ridiculous idea, unstrategic, everything that the Empire's traditions rejected. Considered it for a long moment. "Do it," she said. The messages went out that night. Not demands, not threats. Requests for help sent with humility that no ruler had shown in centuries, explained what she was fighting for, not conquest, not power, a chance to build something new, an empire based on trust instead of terror. The responses came slowly at first, then faster, then in a flood. The thinking minds sent their best logistical algorithms, helping coordinate supply lines with impossible efficiency. The Freeborn Confederacy opened their trading posts as neutral resupply stations. Medical ships arrived from species that had never dealt with the before, staffed by volunteers who wanted to help. But the most surprising support came from humanity. Earth couldn't send warships. They didn't have enough. But they sent something else. Thousands of volunteers who wanted to be part of history. Engineers, doctors, pilots, teachers, counselors. Humans who looked at an empire learning to feel again and wanted to help. Found himself leading a squadron of human pilots flying borrowed ships. They called themselves the Queen's Jesters, and their job was simple: be everywhere at once, confuse the enemy, and never stop making trouble. They were outnumbered in every battle, outclassed. They had no business surviving any engagement. But humans had never been good at knowing when to quit. The tide began to turn, not through any single victory, but through 1,000 small acts of courage and hope. Soldiers who had fought for the rebellion because they were afraid started to wonder if there might be something worth fighting for instead. Governors who had declared for Lord and began to reconsider. The galaxy watched as the terrible empire transformed into something unprecedented. The final battle took place above Prime itself. Lorden had gathered his remaining forces for one last strike at the heart of the Empire. If he could kill the Queen, the rebellion might still succeed. If he could destroy the human who had caused all this, perhaps things could return to normal. His fleet was massive, his weapons were devastating, his soldiers were fanatical. And standing in his way were the Queen's jesters. Led his pilots into the teeth of the enemy formation. They weaved through weapons fire that should have destroyed them. They bought time with blood and skill and sheer human stubbornness. They held the line when holding the line was impossible. The Loyalist fleet arrived in time to turn the battle. Lorden's flagship was destroyed. The rebellion crumbled. The war was over. But ship had taken too much damage. He barely made it back to the palace before his engines died completely. The crash landing shattered bones that human medicine could not easily repair. Internal bleeding spread through his body faster than the doctors could stop it. He was dying. Stood at his bedside, her scales dim with grief, and faced an impossible choice. She could let him die as a human, honoring his species and his nature, or she could save him through the sharing of essence, an ancient ritual that would change him forever. He would no longer be fully human. He might live for centuries. He might never see Earth the same way again. But he would live. Consciousness fatting, looked up at the woman he had accidentally proposed to and deliberately fallen in love with. "Whatever you choose," he whispered, "thank you for everything." She took his hand, and she made her choice. Woke up different. The first thing he noticed was the light. He could see colors that had no names in any human language. The walls of his room glowed with frequencies that his old eyes would never have detected. Everything seemed sharper, clearer, more real than reality had any right to be. The second thing he noticed was the feelings. Emotions washed over him from every direction. The concern of the medical staff, the hope of the guards outside his door, the desperate love of the woman sitting beside his bed, trying to hide her fear behind centuries of royal composure, had saved him through the sharing of essence. She had given him part of herself, rewriting his body at the deepest level. He was no longer human, not entirely, but he was no longer dying either. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice strange in his own ears. "What I had to," she replied. "What I wanted to." She paused. "Are you angry?" Looked at his hands. The skin still looked human mostly, but there were traces of iridescence beneath the surface. His heartbeat felt different. His thoughts moved in patterns that were familiar and foreign at the same time. He was something new, something that had never existed before. "Ask me again in 100 years," he said. "I might have an answer by then." "You will have time," she said softly. "We both will." The wedding took place 1 month later. Every species in the coalition attended. Ships filled the space around Prime, carrying dignitaries and diplomats from across the galaxy. Billions watched the ceremony through broadcast networks that reached every corner of known space. It was the most important wedding in galactic history, and it was also, somehow, the strangest. Human traditions and rituals blended together in ways that confused everyone. Insisted on the exchange of rings, a human custom that the found adorably primitive. Insisted on the ceremonial hunting of a symbolic enemy, which the humans found terrifying until they learned it was supposed to be metaphorical. They compromised. Shot a holographic representation of bureaucratic paperwork while wearing formal human clothing. Declared this acceptable and legally binding under law. The vows were written in a language that hadn't existed until that moment. A mixture of human English and high speech created specifically for this ceremony. Created specifically for them. "I, Cole, promise to make you laugh at least once a day. I promise to remind you that fear is not the same as respect. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, for as long as we both shall live. I, the Undying, promise to protect your right to make terrible jokes even in formal settings. I promise to remind you that recklessness is not the same as courage. I promise to share my throne and my heart with you, for as long as the stars continue to burn. Together, they said in unison, we promise to build something new. The galaxy held its breath. And then they kissed, and the galaxy exhaled, and everything changed forever. The years that followed were not easy. Rebuilding an empire was harder than conquering one. There were still enemies who hated the new order, still problems that seemed impossible to solve, still moments when wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But there were also moments of pure joy. Their first child was born 3 years after the wedding, a daughter with her father's smile and her mother's eyes, who could feel emotions and make jokes like a human. They named her Sira, which meant hope in the old language. More children followed, some more human, some more, all of them bridges between two species that had learned to love each other. The empire transformed around them. Fear gave way to something more complex, respect earned rather than demanded, alliances built on trust rather than terror. Humans flooded into space as teachers and artists and counselors, helping an ancient civilization remember how to feel. And in return, humanity gained access to technology and knowledge that accelerated their development by centuries. They learned that they were not alone in the universe, that their greatest strength had never been their intelligence or their technology. It was their ability to make connections, to find common ground with anyone, to look at something alien and terrifying and say, I bet we could be friends. 400 years passed. Stood on the same observation deck where he and had first truly talked. His body was older now, changed by centuries of living as something neither human nor, but his heart was the same, still stubborn, still hopeful, still capable of terrible jokes. Any regrets? Asked, standing beside him as she had for 4 centuries. Only that I haven't made my daily terrible joke yet. You have several hours remaining. I have faith in your abilities. He laughed, and she smiled, and for a moment they were just two people who had somehow found each other across the vast darkness of space. Below them, in the palace, their great-great were arguing about whose turn it was to choose the evening's entertainment. Their oldest daughter, now an accomplished diplomat, was negotiating a new trade agreement with a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. Their son was teaching at a university where humans and studied side by side. The empire they had built together was thriving, not through fear, not through conquest, but through something that had seemed impossible 4 centuries ago. Love, trust, hope. Looked at his wife, this ancient queen who had once been so alone that it was killing her. She looked back at him, this human who had crashed through her ceiling and never left. Thank you, she said. For what? For making a joke when you should have begged for your life, for staying when you should have run, for loving me when I had forgotten what love meant. Took her hand. After 400 years, it still felt like home. Thank you for laughing, he said. Everything else followed from that. Above them, in the vast darkness of space, new stars were being born. Somewhere out there, other species were taking their first steps toward the light, not knowing that they would find friends waiting for them. The galaxy had changed because one human crashed through a ceiling and refused to be afraid. It wasn't the strength that mattered. It wasn't the technology or the weapons or the power. It was the choice to reach out, to connect, to believe that even the most terrifying stranger might become the most beloved friend. Humanity didn't conquer the stars. They befriended them instead. And the stars, against all odds, befriended them back.